Hi everyone, Dr. Lewis here. So just as a little disclaimer, every single time I have started this video, my dogs have started barking or the neighbors have started being loud. I think everybody's going a little stir crazy now. So there might be a little bit of noise. If there is, I apologize. So this is just a quick little kind of discussion question, read, walk through, whatever you want to call it, to go over the David Sedaris stories, which are our last texts in the class. So David Sedaris is a humorist, and he does a lot of things. He's a comedian, he's an author, he's a radio personality. He kind of does a lot of things in the humor field. He's known for self-deprecating humor in collections of short stories and essays. He writes autobiographical material in a way that readers can relate to the subject matter. So there's usually, like if you ignore the specifics, there's kind of central themes of family and love, the rough teenage years, finding a job, settling down with a partner, etc. So kind of universal themes in the autobiographical material. So we had two readings for today, and this is mostly just going to be me talking about what you should get from these stories, walking through kind of the important plot points. So you can just skim these if you feel very confident about the understanding. If not, we can walk through them together. So Old Faithful is the first one that we read, and it is a short little piece about basically a boil that pops up on his back, and his partner Hugh eventually lances it for him. And it might be like, what is this essay actually about? Because seemingly it just seems like a story of like a boil, but it's really about what the boil symbolizes to the relationship as well. So he does talk about their relationship, kind of settling into the relationship, and then kind of that point in a relationship where you just kind of, you realize that it's forever, which is not exactly how he words it, but it's at the point where you've kind of settled into being the old married couple. You've kind of settled into the fact that you're never going to be with someone else. And this isn't necessarily this isn't a bad thing. I feel like the way I'm wording it is bad, but it is different to go from just meeting someone to this comfortable place. And I think the boil becomes the center of that, because think about how many people in your life you have you have popped a boil for. I'm going to assume, unless you are medical somehow, unless you're a nurse or a doctor or training or something along those lines, I'm going to assume it's close to none for most of us, or maybe one. And if you think about that one person that you have popped a boil for, I'm going to also assume that it was someone who's very close to you, a child, a parent, a partner, a husband or wife, etc. So I have actually popped a boil on somebody before, and it was my father, of whom I am very close to, and it was disgusting, but he's my dad. So there's a kind of like, the boil becomes the symbol of intimacy, of staying together even in the unpleasant parts of life, of kind of getting older and settling down and realizing that sometimes you're going to have a boil, but you still might have those people that are there for you even with the boil. So I think that this is just like a nice little essay that brings that to life. And one of my favorite quotes from this is, "Besides, I said, I know you'll do it again if I need you to. We're an elderly monogamous couple, and this is all part of the bargain." The thought of this kept Hugh awake that night, and still does. We go to bed, and he stares toward the window as I sleep soundly beside him, my bandaged boil silently weeping onto the sheets. So this is, it's meant to be kind of humorous, that, you know, now you're with me for life. You're going to pop every boil that I have. And Hugh is kind of like, well, what did I get myself into? But so it's just kind of a humorous look at that moment where you do kind of click into, we're old, we're monogamous, this is kind of it. which is very comforting. But again, it's comforting, but also, like, forever can be daunting. Like, the idea of forever can be daunting. So it captures kind of an interesting moment in a relationship. Okay, so moving on to Dinah the Christmas Whore, which has our interesting title. And I just want to go through some of the major plot points just to orient ourselves. So, who is the main character and what is he doing at the beginning of the story? The main character is basically David as a teenager. So it's a teenage boy who's been forced to get a job. This is supposed to be somewhat autobiographical. So he's supposed to get a job and earn money. So he gets a job at a food court at a mall, and it's near the Christmas season. So this is an interesting time to work at a mall, and especially a mall food court if you have ever worked retail during Christmas. So I ask, why is he angry or upset? And to a certain extent, you can just say, oh, he's a teenager, which that is part of it. It's also, again, just think about working retail at Christmas time or Christmas time in general. So Christmas time, it's supposed to be a happy, loving, great time. And it is. Like, it is, depending on your context and situation. It's not that it's necessarily outwardly bad, but it can be stressful. I had so many parties last year that they actually started stressing me out, which I know that's a incredibly, in some ways, privileged comment. Oh, there's just so many parties. But there's lots of obligations. You have to go to like 8 different parties. You have to go to a work party if you work. You have to buy people presents. And when I say have to, I understand that none of this is an obligation, but you feel socially pressured into it. So it can be a stressful time just for being busy, just for trying to create a happy, magical moment. It takes work to decorate. If you've never decorated an entire house before, it can be stressful financially because you want to give to people. So it's kind of a tense time, or it can be for some people. And then he's kind of experiencing this in the worst place at the mall food court. So one of his lines is, and this is talking about everybody else, they were sheep, stupid animals programmed by nature to mate and graze and bleed out their wishes to the obese retired school principal who sat in his ass in the mall's sorry-looking North Pole. So that's kind of his attitude toward people at the beginning. So there's a question that he talks about wanting to find the answer to it. And he's imagining in the food court, he imagines that he's going to be in a TV show and that he will have a little sidekick monkey with him. And it'll be like one of those TV shows where you go on adventures and then at the end, there's a moral or a lesson. There's a so what at the end there. And he can't figure out the so what of his story. He can't figure out the lesson, the thesis statement, the moral, why it all matters. And he thinks to himself, as he's thinking about his TV show and everything else, what brings people joy? And it's an interesting question because the difference between joy and happiness, like a lot of things can make us happy. A TV show, a cup of coffee, a lot of things can make us at least superficially happy. But what brings you actual joy, like bone deep, guttural joy? And that answer can be complicated. Like that can sometimes be a complicated thing to find as you're navigating life and trying to figure out what makes you really happy, what fulfills you. So he's thinking about all this when he has a shocking experience with his sister. So his sister drags him along essentially to help her save her friend. And her friend actually ends up being someone who is a prostitute, essentially. So this is very shocking for David because his sister used to be the bleeding sheep, the the drone, the sheep that's just going through life buying things, essentially. So to figure out that she has this secret and somewhat exciting life, that she's hanging out with people who are a little bit dangerous, that this is kind of shocking for him. So they go and save Dinah and they bring her back to the home. And then we kind of transition into David having his kind of epiphany about what's happening. So why does this change his viewpoint about life? So this is a change for him, and I think we can explore that in a couple of different ways. The first one is just he made assumptions about people that were untrue. And he's realizing that there's more to his sister. He's realizing there's more to his family. His mom basically just makes Dinah a drink and then sits her down at the table and they all have a nice talk. He's realizing that there's more to people in general. So he actually does have what he calls convicts working at the mall food court with him. And he observes them but never talks to them. So there is this big difference between him kind of observing the so-called convicts to see if they do something, exciting, versus his sister, who actually just makes friends with someone who does have a record, like makes friends with her and is honestly kind to help her. So she talks about the terms of her probation. She's trying to help Dinah get her life straight. She's trying to help her. They're actual friends. So he's realizing all of these things about life. And he's also kind of getting to the moment of he's really happy that his family is sitting down here just having a chat and a laugh with someone like Dinah. That he knows that no one else on the street has this moment. So it's also kind of a family moment, that he's connecting with his family in a way that he hadn't been before. The last line of the story says, essentially, it suddenly occurred to me just like that. So think about what occurs to him and what we are supposed to take from this story. So if we're thinking about the teenage David in this story, what is he trying to figure out and what does he figure out? So if it suddenly occurred to me just like that, what occurs to him, is it what brings him joy? Is it what brings his family joy? And I think that, think about what it is. Is it his family? Is it understanding other humans as complex and not just bleeding sheep programmed to mate and graze, as he says in the beginning? Is it understanding complexity in life? And again, I think for David, it comes back to this familial unit, that they are in this together, and with this connection, that is where his joy is coming from. That is where he's finding meaning. And I think that this is why I like this story, that it comes down to finding what brings you joy, finding what fulfills you, finding what makes you truly happy, and then holding on to that. And as long as you hold on to that, it's not that everything's going to be perfect, but you'll be able to get through it if you do that. Okay, so this was my talk through of these stories. If you have any questions or thoughts, you can obviously bring them to me or write about them on our test number 3, which has now been posted, though not due for over a week. All right, so have a good one. I hope everyone is safe and healthy, and I will talk to you soon.